Okay, everyone, good evening. Welcome to our webinar. As many of you know, these webinar series are organized as part of a project named Play and Learn English, coordinated by Alparslan University ELT departments and funded by US Embassy Ankara. Tonight, Associate Professor Galip Kartal will be with us and deliver his speech on game mechanics in EFL classes. Let me say a few things about him. He holds BA, MA, and PhD degrees in English language teaching and has been working on at Konya Necmettin Erbakan University ELT departments as faculty member for many years. So hocam, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me, Samet hocam. And good evening, everyone. I hope you are all doing well during these very hot days, last days of the summer, but not least, I guess we are saying that in my city, town, it is really hot, but now it is doing well. Okay, Samet hocam introduced. I think that's enough. Today, games should be talking, not introductions. So I'll share my screen and begin as soon as possible. I think you can see it, right?
Yep.
Okay, then. The name of this project is Gamify English. And when I first saw it, it really caught my attention because, you know, we need to gamify it, literally. I mean, we need to gamify. I'll explain why and how, and I'll talk about game mechanics, but it is really interesting to see that gamification, gamifying, and the importance of games in language teaching, especially in foreign language teaching, caught the attention of not only teachers, but also project makers, but also researchers. This is something good. So that's why it is really important for me too. Whenever I start something, I really begin with the question of why, because, you know, it is in the core part. When we consider it as an onion, the core part is the red part and the most important part for us. What you do follows why you do it. That's why we need to begin by answering the question of why, because when you are satisfied with that answer, then you can continue. That's why when I searched the literature, tried to read some related articles after this call for speaking on game mechanics, I came up with this gamify word and these words related to it. When you gamify something in the classroom, you need to have a goal, because, you know, we are talking about the differences between an activity and a game. So what makes something an activity? What makes something a game? If you don't have a goal, you cannot distinguish it. And if you don't have a goal, whatever you do in the classroom, it doesn't matter, it just meets all the requirements of a game, it cannot help you to teach a language or learn a language or help learners learn a language in the classroom. This is something very important. And of course, A stands for attention grabbing. You are teaching a foreign language, and in our context, the first question is why? I can communicate in another language, in my first language. I'm really good at it. Why should I learn another language? So if something is attention grabbing, of course, it will be more helpful for you to do it in the classroom. And M stands for two words, motivating and mechanics. Of course, here you are motivating your students with the mechanics you have. I'm going to talk about mechanics in detail, But whenever I see this word, I remember the word engine. And I say this. In the classroom, whenever you say, okay, kids, today we are going to play a game, you risk something here, right? You risk losing the control of the classroom because children all go in fun mode, which means that they will only focus on enjoying. Of course, you can teach implicitly too. That's another goal of you. But when you lose that control, it becomes very difficult for you to achieve something. That's why you turn into a Porsche with no brakes. And it happens only in songs. In real life, of course, we prefer the engine of a Ferrari, the brakes of a Porsche, and the body of a Volvo. But in the classroom, you need brakes, right? Because it will be helping you to monitor, to observe the development. And by doing this, of course, another thing is, it is also related to attention grabbing one. It needs to be motivating, because if you do not motivate your students to do something, especially your young learners in the classroom, it becomes very difficult for you to reach a goal. And it should be interesting. Again, attention grabbing and this one are here. Normally, when it is game, it is E, the letter is E, and we use engagement for that one. Actually, engagement and interesting are close friends. When something is engaging, it is also interesting for most of the people. And you need to bring fun to the classroom. We always say this. You need to bring fun to the classroom. And of course, it should be yielding something. What is your goal? And following that goal, it needs to be yielding something. You need to reach something. Okay. I think now every participant can send a message by using the chat box. I allowed that. Okay, we have another figure here. You know, we are using these terms interchangeably: game-based learning, digital game-based learning, digital game-based language learning. Of course, it is in the core part 2, because our major goal is teaching language. Digital part is, of course, the popular one nowadays, because the world is digitalized, right? With mobile technologies and with some other virtual technologies, we are using the word digital more and more. It is unstoppable, actually, in today's world. So when we look at these words or terms, we see a distinction like this. When we use gamification, as for the learning activity, it is largely unchanged, and game features are mostly use of extrinsic rewards. Because, as I said earlier, when you say, let's play a game, or when you try to just present it as a game, the rewards are mainly extrinsic. There will be a loser and a winner. And actually, this is not something we look for, right? We are not looking for losers or winners. We hope that everyone will be winners in the classroom. And when we win, the answer is very easy: when students are engaged, when they have fun, and when they learn something. That's why in the gamification part, you have gamified worksheets. Playful learning and game-based learning are also used for these words. And the game-based learning one is the most, let's say, general one. Actually, of course, as practitioners, we do not obsess with terms. We just look at the practice. But my goal for showing this table is to see that there is a difference between gamifying, gamification, playful learning, games, using games, and gamifying. Because when you gamify something in the classroom, you also turn an activity into a game. by following some basic, simple rules. Okay. So the why question also begins with answering some questions related to theory, because you know a theory is an educated guess, and without a theory we are without a guide. We need a theory, and we can say that game-based learning is relevant to various language acquisition theories. We can talk about immersive exposure to language learning environments, lowered anxiety and other effective barriers to language learning, and increased use of target language for interaction. You know, here we can talk about constructivism and interaction and many other related, both language specific theories and general learning theories. And all these are supporting the use of games in the classroom, or gamifying, making use of gamifying in the classroom. At this point, when we try to bridge the theory and the practice and the approaches and methods, which are hot topics all of the time, it leads us to talk about the distinction between teaching about the language and teaching the language itself. So what happens when you teach about the language? You teach the language like geography, mathematics. You teach the rules. You teach the forms. You teach mainly the what question. But when you teach the language itself, you focus on functions. You focus on meaning. So you teach how to apologize in the classroom, how to give orders, how to order a meal at a restaurant, how to check in at a hotel, and how to check in at the airport. You teach all these, and these are the functions of a language. And actually these functions are used in daily life, right? We are using languages for these purposes. But when you teach about the language, you always approach it as a subject, and it automatically becomes something boring, and it doesn't motivate learners to learn. Of course, here it is the topic of another day: forms, functions, its relation, teaching grammar, necessity of grammar, and focusing on meaning, communicative language teaching, blah, blah, blah. The thing here is that all I want to say is that gamification and games are automatically leading you to use the language itself, because you try to do something with the language. You do not care the rules. You don't try to learn some forms. Okay, so today's topic is game mechanics. So what are they? A game's mechanics are the rules and procedures. That's why I tried to find the link between the why question, gamifying that slide we saw at the very beginning, and our aim. So that's why when you have a rule and a procedure and a goal, you guide the player. The game responds to the player's moves and actions. And all these can be integrated into your game by following some language teaching methodology. So it refers to the essential gameplay and the activity or sets of activities the player repeats throughout the game. So all these repetitions, we know that these are also very important for language learning, are important, and you can just include the language parts, linguistic input here. Here we have two types of it. One of them is learning mechanics. The other one is assessment mechanics. Learning mechanics have primarily a learning goal and are designed based on learning theory approaches. And of course, this part is very important for us. This is the major part. And assessment mechanics, of course, here you have a diagnostic goal, and all these are based on testing theory approaches, because you know, in assessment, we always say this: if you do not assess something, you cannot teach it. It doesn't matter you are gamifying or doing anything else in the classroom. If you do not assess it, you cannot teach it. It doesn't mean that you need to have an assessment section at the end of every course. We are not saying that. Sometimes assessment is conducted by using or following alternative ways. Sometimes you do it implicitly. Sometimes you just observe your students and you do not share the results. Actually, assessment is just like monitoring the progress, right? That's why it is very important. And through the mechanics you create, you define how the game is going to work for the people who play. So you have all the details, because you know here you are trying to teach a language too. That's why you need to be taking control of everything during the process. So the mechanics describe rules the player follows and the rules the game itself follows. So you cannot gamify an activity without following all these rules. Of course, when we say game mechanics, you can just talk about many other games. We are not trying to make a link between gamification, gamifying, and language learning. These are the things you need to follow during a game, and we are saying that you need to involve the game mechanics to make the teaching or learning process more and more successful. Also, it contributes to the fun of the game, but they are also a significant part of the learning experience. Of course, if you focus on the learning part, you will include some related things. And if you focus on the fun part, your mechanics will be shaped accordingly. That's why mechanics will be your guide, roadmap. Okay, I want to give an example here. I'm sure that all of you know the Angry Birds, right? Features a sling mechanic that allows the player to have birds at sandwich fix. And all you can. It features a shooter mechanic that defeats hungry aliens with either cupcakes or milkshakes. So a simple rule is included, and it is called as mechanics here. Another game is a paycheck away game. It is a board game, and here it is putting you in the shoes of a real homeless person or a family, and players experience difficult problems a homeless family faces and start to see homelessness as a symptom, not a cause. And here, when you have a mechanic like this, you will just allow your students to focus on a part, and it will be also allowing your students to follow something. That's why when you gamify something in the classroom, you need the mechanics. As for the learning mechanics and game mechanics, I want to show this mapping framework by Erna. In the learning mechanics, we have abstract, concrete ones. The abstract ones are instructional, guidance, participation, generalization, discrimination, observation, explore, identity, plan, objectivity, so on and so forth. And in the concrete part, we have repetition. We have demonstration. We have tutorial, action, task, feedback. You see in the concrete part, which is the observable one, you can see many links between language teaching methodology, methods, and these learning mechanics. As for the action and task, for example, you are simply applying total physical response, right? Or you don't need to make a link between the theory, method, approach, or practice. Simply, we all say that in a classroom, especially in young learners' classroom, you need to involve your students actively, and physical involvement is very important, because you know attention span of a student is very limited. When the age goes, or when they are young, attention span is very low. That's why you need to provide some physical activities. You need to involve them physically in the classroom. And feedback, question answer, experimentation. reflect, discuss, analyze, imitation, shadowing, modeling, simulation, assessment. For example, maybe you are teaching pronunciation. Shadowing is automatically a method of teaching pronunciation, right? You make use of shadowing by listening to native speakers. You are not shadowing long sentences, short ones maybe, but the aim is trying to sound like a native speaker. And by doing this, your aim is trying to catch the sentence stress, word stress, because you know the pronunciations of the words are changing in a sentence. Of course, maybe some of you are saying that, okay, do we need to sound like a native? That's again the topic of another day. I'm not saying that. The thing is that we need to be accurate, right? Okay, we don't need to sound like a British, American, or Australian, maybe. But the thing is that sometimes we call a word as mispronounced. Why? Because we know that although we don't have some rules in English pronunciation, some pronunciations are problematic. That's why shadowing is automatically one of the ways of teaching pronunciation, and it is a concrete learning mechanic. So when you include that mechanic into your teaching, your activity in the classroom, you will be achieving something. And as for the game mechanics, of course, so we all have activities. We call almost everything as an activity in the classroom. So what happens when we gamify something? We need to include all this learning and game mechanics, okay? Because when you look game mechanics itself, you will see fun, you will see challenge, you will see cutscenes, action points, levels, tokens. And when you just integrate fun and shadowing, and when you try to gamify it, you will achieve something. My example was from pronunciation, but of course you can apply it to many other areas of language. Okay, I will also talk about the types of language games. We have sorting, ordering, arranging games, information gap games, guessing games, searching, matching, labeling, exchanging, board, and role-playing games. Actually, I'm going to introduce them shortly. My main goal here is to talk about role-playing games because they are very popular nowadays, and you know, you can just gamify something, an activity in the classroom by making use of role play, because role playing, drama, and nowadays we use, you know, metaverse, virtual worlds, in some other online games. In almost all of them, you will see some roles, right? That's why you can bring those roles into the classroom. You can turn them into role-playing games. Okay, I will show them shortly. This is the sorting, ordering, arranging game. You just put the furniture in the related room. Information games. Some information is missing, and you just try to find the related one. You have guessing games. I'm sure that as a student teacher, as a teacher trainer, and as a teacher, you saw many examples, and you try to give information about something. Actually, this is also played for celebrities and for some other people. You give information about them, and people try to guess. And searching games, you search here. This is another version of two-way information games. You here seek and give information, and you try to solve a problem. And matching games, you can find hidden objects here. And labeling games, a similar one. Exchanging games, actually many card games can be called as exchanging games. And here students border cards, objectives, and ideas. And board games, of course, when you make use of a board game in the classroom, reduces teachers' talking time by putting the focus on student interactions. This is one of the goals, actually, right? And it encourages healthy competition between classmates, which helps build solid relationships. For example, if you are playing a game on letters, you can just teach the silent letters in English by making use of a game. You can just turn this into a game. You know, in some games, you are making use of letters. And if you want to teach the silent letters in English, just integrate them. Okay, then. So what are the role-playing games? These games involve students in playing roles that they might not play in real life. And they might also be employed to get students to practice dialogues. And one of the commonly used version of this is massively multiple online role-playing games. And some examples are New World, Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft, so on and so forth. And I'm sure that you saw some articles or you heard the use of World of Warcraft for teaching language. And I'm sure that some of you are playing them. Actually, the linguistic input here is very important. Two things are important. One is the linguistic input. The other thing is the interaction between the players. You know, language is for communication. And when you talk about communication, you also talk about interaction. In these games, in order to achieve something, doesn't matter you are killing someone by playing with someone else, or you are a team, or you are a single player. You are trying to achieve something. And while doing that, you are exposed to language. One of the keywords in language learning and teaching, exposure. Another one is interaction, right? You try to solve a problem with your team's member or do something else. Okay, at this point, for the massively multiple online role-playing games and the popular word, metaverse, because of Facebook, and even Facebook changed its name and it is now Meta, right? So what is metaverse? And ideas, opportunities, challenges. So if Facebook changed its name to Meta, it means that the world will be more and more meta, right? Actually, Second Life is one of the virtual worlds, and where you can also call it as a metaverse. So metaverse is a brand name nowadays, but also metaverse is used for virtual worlds. Okay. So here I want to talk about my research, and I'm going to show how to gamify by making use of role-playing and task-based language teaching by making use of a virtual world. My example is from Second Life, but you can also apply in metaverse. And actually, recently I see that we have many fluent English speakers who learned English language while playing games like this. I'm sure that you also know some people like this, right? Okay, so here we need to revisit teaching the language itself, the functions of the language, not the forms, right? So this was my tasks actually. We tried to orient, greet, we had adventures, we traveled, we talked about foods, jobs, shopping, clothes, gifts, sports, games, health, art and culture, music, cinema, and theater. Maybe you are saying that, okay, we cannot bring augmented reality glasses in the classroom, into the classroom. We cannot just invite our students to a virtual environment. How can we do that? No problem. In future, most probably, they will be very cheap and we will be using them. But for now, you can make use of simulations in the classroom. You can just conduct these role plays in the classroom. You don't need to be online, or you don't need to be in a virtual world with your avatar. Because this is also related to task-based language teaching and role playing and having roles and making these roles enjoyable for learners and gamifying something. Okay, for example, from the foods task, in this picture, you can see that a group is dining at a restaurant. They played a food game with a role play activity, and the students worked in a team to describe the food items on a board in Second Life without naming the foods. The other team had to guess the food item based on the other group's description. Today, I saw something interesting. Actually, I saw it on WhatsApp. It was something like this: life is like soup, and I am like a fork. Or life is a soup, and I am a fork. Okay, you know, in daily life, our students have problem with using the words used in daily life because they are not using the target language to do something. They have their first language to do it. So you can teach fork, spoon. You can just ask your students to bring a spoon to the table, and you will see whether the student brings it in this virtual world. And they role play the bargaining in a Second Life store. They created their own clothes shop, conversation between a shop assistant and a customer. And these are also easy to apply in the classroom. And they compare and contrasted e-shopping. You can also apply it to e-shopping. And they chose a character from a painting or sculpture and talked about it, discussed on how culture shapes the art, and conducted a role play as a museum director and as a visitor in a Second Life museum. Okay, if your opportunities are limited, you can just bring a picture from a museum, and one of the students can be the director, and the other is the visitor, and they can just have a role play, and you can include some other mechanics, of course, because you will be teaching something at a time, especially in young learners' classrooms. And they conducted a role play as a gallery owner and a gallery visitor in a Second Life gallery. And this figure is from the music task. They have a role play here, and they identified the pictures of celebrities on the classroom board and discuss with the class how much they know about them, try to learn the names of music instruments and describe them, role play the famous TV program The Voice. Okay, if you are gamifying something like this, just bring something from real life. Make use of The Voice, right? Okay, they maybe watch it in their first language. But when you introduce them with the language, or when they watch it in the target language, they will learn many things. They will feel more relaxed and flexible to use the language. They will use, when they ask for the coach, who do you pick as your coach? When they see that your sentence, they will never forget it. And here, this figure is from the hospital, the health task. And one group is talking at a hospital in Second Life. They conducted a patient and a doctor role play, talked about common diseases. And of course, if you just bring it nowadays, they'll talk about COVID-19. But I think we are enough with COVID-19. We almost know everything, right? And they prepared a TV program on health and conducted a donor and patient role play and conducted a pharmacist, a patient role play. These were just some options or ideas to use from the tasks I used. And for the real life and real classroom, physical classroom option version, you can just turn those into role-playing games. Okay, this is a table from a research article, and the researchers collected the games, and these are the orders actually, and all these games are used for language teaching. So if you are wondering, actually most of them are mobile applications. You know, nowadays we just use computer assisted language learning and mobile assisted language learning interchangeably too, because you know, you can have the application of something. So you have the application of Facebook, so you can also call it as using mobile phones to learn the language. So the thing is that they are almost everywhere. Children are using their smartphones to play these games, and these games actually are approved because people conducted experimental research and they found that these games have positive impacts. They change something. And I'm sure that you are familiar with most of them, like Duolingo, The Sims, Warcraft. I'm not sure about the others, but I'm sure that some game lovers are familiar. Okay, I want to revisit my gamify acronym here one more time. We need to have a goal. Maybe we are gamifying an activity, but we shouldn't forget that we are trying to integrate fun and learning. And it should be attention grabbing. We need to have motivating things, and we need to follow the mechanics. It should be interesting, of course. Then we need to bring fun, and we need to achieve something. We need to teach something, or we need to learn something in the classroom. So maybe you are making use of a role-playing game, and your goal is learning. This is it. Your goal is learning the related words or phrases used while traveling, or maybe you are just gamifying something for driving. You know, in Turkey, if you enter the classroom, I'm sure that when you ask the procedure of driving a car, most of us will face problems because mainly we do not make use of simulations or role plays like this. Imagine that a daughter is learning how to drive a car from her father, and the father begins by saying, okay, kapıyı aç, open the door, koltuğu ayarla, adjust your seat, dikiz aynasını ayarla. The problems begin here, right? What was the dikiz aynası? Okay, they can call it mirror, no problem. As long as we communicate, it is okay. But, you know, rear view mirror is better here. And other part comes, debriyaja bas. Another problem occurs, right? Because most of us didn't drive in a foreign country, and we didn't press the clutch in another country, or we didn't see the notice warning when we try to start the engine, press the clutch. Automatically the process begins. You can just gamify it. Okay, you can just compare the windshield and the rear view mirror, and you can just talk about engine with your advanced learners. And of course, the level will determine most of the things here. So it is very easy to gamify, but sometimes it is very difficult. At this point, game mechanics play significant roles. That's why I want to finish with a quote from Bray. It's not a magic bullet, just something else that should be in a teacher's toolbox. So you can gamify, and gamifying should be in your toolbox. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for your patience and for having me again.
Galip Hocam, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. And if there is any question, you can just put it in the chat box, and we are happy to yeah.
Do mechanics vary across different types of games? Yes, sure, because the mechanics are related to the rules, and the learning part is also should be in line with that one. Actually, when you gamify something, you need to follow simple ones. General mechanics do not change, but of course, following your aim and goal, you need to be flexible in your mechanics.
Okay, thank you very much, hocam. Any other question?
It also depends on the complexity of the game. How complex is that? Sometimes you will be focusing on the rules more than the process, but when the process becomes automatic, of course, mechanics will be something passive. You'll not be considering them all the time. And as a teacher, when you just gamify something in the classroom, your process will be automatic. That's why you will face less and less problems.
So one more question.
Should all the game mechanics you showed in the mapping framework exist in game-based activities? Yeah, it is impossible. Actually, it depends on your goal, one of the principles of teaching is try to teach something at a time. That's why, as for the learning mechanics, of course, you cannot include all of them. Just try to find the related one and try to use the most appropriate one for your teaching. Okay, what are the main components of game mechanics? I showed it in one of my figures, but the main ones can be called as when you use the word game, the first one is fun. Okay, it is abstract. Sometimes you see that students are smiling. You believe that they are enjoying, but it is still abstract, right? Sometimes maybe they are pretending. And the action, the level, tokens, and game turns, movement, physical involvement, simulation, assessment parts, all these are very important. Tutorial. Even in the tutorial part, you will achieve many things.
Well, thank you very much, hocam. I think, yeah, another question. What about age of the learners? How should we approach for difference between age?
Okay. Just like the games, very young children cannot play very difficult games, It is like that with younger learners. The rules should be simple. And your mechanics shouldn't be complicated. And students should be, or let's say, you shouldn't try to teach complex things because your aim is teaching the language. Because if you focus on the game mechanics part more than the learning mechanics part, the things will be more difficult, especially for younger learners. And then you need to spend most of your time for the game part. So the process should be followed or observed, and then you need to be focusing on the learning part more than the game part.
Thank you very much, hocam.
Especially for the advanced learners, of course, the learning mechanics can be very flexible because, we try to simplify the things in the classroom, right? We have adapted materials. Why do we do that? Because we know that if something is not frequently used, or if something is very difficult for the lower level learner to understand, we try to just adjust the material. But for advanced learners, or for learners who are more flexible, you can just focus on the game mechanics part more, and you can include more things from the linguistic input part. But if your students level not enough to understand everything, you need to be following that part more and more. I think we are done.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. Thanks for participating.
Hocam, thank you very much for this talk and answering the questions. It was great having you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you hocam.
Pleasure. And
Thank you,
for
hocam.
having me one more time.
Warm regards to Konya.
Thank you.